Okay, so that means, my friends, that we need to move backwards a little to rerun that vote on the motion that the governing body report, sorry, the standing committee report on matters of governance and legal matters be approved. Matthew, I hand that back to you to run the vote, please.
Thank you very much. If we could have that vote on screen again, please. Okay, so that has safely appeared on screen. I will, in a moment, I will launch the poll for 30 seconds. Please be quick on the chat if you are unable to see the poll once I have launched it, and I will have a running commentary as we're going, just to make sure everybody's clear what's happening. So when you're ready, please, Mike, if we could launch the poll, please. Right, that is now on my screen, and I can see that people are voting. Another tweak that's been made behind the scenes in the intervening gap is that I can now see live the numbers of people who are voting. So just for information behind the scenes, we have 117 people logged on, and we have 107, 108 votes cast. Now, given we also have some non-voting members on the chat, that is looking like we are not having any problems with the voting system now. There is nobody saying that they're struggling to vote in the chat. So therefore, I will call for that vote to be closed, please. It very much looks to me as if the technical issues have been resolved. There we have a hand up, but that's just gone down. Could people use the chat if they've had any issues with that? I'll just give a few seconds before I.
There is some mention in the chat of someone who wasn't able to vote last time is now able to vote. So it looks as if it's been resolved. My heart rate is decreasing as this goes through, and my blood pressure. Excellent. Right, I will announce the results of that vote for the report on governance and legal matters. We have 104 votes in favour, 2 votes against, and 3 abstentions. So that is very clearly carried, and I am satisfied with the integrity of the voting system. So we may move on. Thank you, Chair. Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Leon, and your colleagues for resolving that that little problem. Then, before we move on to item 9 on the agenda, for new members of the governing body, it's perhaps worth saying that the first session on our agenda is usually taken up with, as we've already experienced, a number of legal, technical and other matters. And then the rest of the agenda, some items recur every year, but the Standing Committee and others have long tried to encourage debates, motions, discussions about matters of significant importance in the wider community. And of course, climate change is among such matters, as indeed is the next item on our agenda, which is all about ethical investment. So I'm going to invite the Bishop of St. David's, please, if she would propose the motion which is set out for you on your order paper as item 9. Bishop Joe. Bishop Joe, at the moment you are muted. Don't know whether you are speaking, nor can we see you, I'm afraid. Ah, we are. You're unmuted. And
start video. There we are.
There we are. Good morning.
Good morning.
Croeso. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you. Joanna Penberthy, Bishop of St. David's. Your Grace, members of governing body. The motion that I'm asking governing body to support today is serious and deeply practical. It's a motion that acknowledges some facts, sets out a goal, and proposes certain courses of action that we can take to work with others to achieve that goal. The fact that this motion acknowledges is that we are living at a time of rising global temperatures so serious that it warrants the use of the term emergency. The UK government has itself declared a climate emergency. This motion therefore asks the governing body to declare a climate emergency and to acknowledge that an urgent, rapid and global response to global warming is now necessary. This is a timely motion because our country is preparing to host the UN COP26 conference in Glasgow under the chairmanship of the Right Honourable Alok Sharma in November. Delegates from across the world will gather on November the 1st to try to agree the next set of targets by which to limit the rising global temperatures so as to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. Mitigating the worst effects of climate change is unfortunately the best we can hope for. That's why this motion starts on such a serious note, declaring a climate emergency. We cannot stop the world's temperature rising. Industrialization in agribusiness has changed our planet forever, and there is no going back. A month ago, I was at an Anglican Communion webinar about disinvesting from companies that profit from the extraction of fossil fuel. And I was privileged to hear a speaker from the province of Aotearoa who spoke movingly of how some islands in her province had already disappeared under the rising seas, while others are under threat. Unfortunately, the life we live here in the United Kingdom has already adversely affected the lives of others across the globe. Global temperatures, along with sea levels, will rise. We cannot stop that. But if today there was only a message of doom and gloom, there would be no Glasgow COP26 conference and no GB motion. Humanity cannot stop global warming, but it is possible with enough political will to limit the rise in global temperatures if countries act together now. Global temperatures rise because humanity has been increasing the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere year on year, and this needs to stop. The world's atmosphere needs to reach net carbon zero by 2050, with most of the changes made in the next 10 years. It isn't yet thought practical to stop putting any carbon at all into the atmosphere. Net carbon zero means that any carbon put into the atmosphere will be compensated for by measures designed to take the same amount of carbon out of the atmosphere. If countries agree to a net carbon zero target by 2050, with staging post targets at 2030 and 2040, it is possible to limit the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 centigrade. Human ingenuity unwittingly created this global warming problem. With human ingenuity, we can intentionally work together towards mitigation, and this governing body can be a part of it. So this motion is not simply about the problem. By putting this motion, we are asking governing body to commit the Church in Wales to becoming part of the answer. We ask governing body to welcome the fact that many solutions are already available to help us live sustainably in the 21st century. Renewable technology, sustainable transport, zero carbon buildings. Our motion names but three. In Wales, the Centre for Alternative Technology, for example, has been at the forefront of developing solutions to help people live more sustainably since 1973. If the rise in global temperatures is to be restricted to 1.5 centigrade by 2050, then we, you and me, have to learn to live and work differently. I'm sure that many of you are already living and working differently and have been for some time, and it will be your experience that will help those of us who are a little later making such changes, realizing that our efforts, however small they might seem, really will make a difference. This motion is not asking governing body to commit to waving magic wands, but to do the hard work of looking at our common life and practices and seeing how we can do what we do in such a way that we move towards net carbon zero. This motion is not asking the Church in Wales to go out on a limb, moving towards net carbon zero on our own. Welsh Government has committed already Wales to be net carbon zero by 2050, with the public sector areas under its own control to be net zero by 2030. In the third section of the first part of this motion, the governing body is asked to commit to work with partners and to support the decisions of government, councils, organisations across Wales, declaring a climate emergency and setting net zero carbon emission targets for their local areas. We are Church in Wales members. We are also voters, concerned citizens, local residents, who together with others can make our voices heard. This motion also calls upon us to work in partnership where we can, making alliances, learning from others, and perhaps also sharing our faith. Brave and committed activists have been working hard on these issues for years. It's time for us ordinary people to join them. Who knows, we in the Church in Wales could help to tip the scales. This motion is in two parts. Without the second part, it will be difficult for us to be sure, were the governing body to pass this motion, that we would be able to implement it, to move from aspiration to practical application. In the second part of this motion, governing body requests that the representative body prepares an action plan for consideration by the governing body meeting at or before its meeting in April 2022 that sets out how the whole of the Church in Wales can reach a net zero carbon emission position as soon as practically possible thereafter. If the governing body were to pass this motion, the RB has a recently appointed member of staff who is qualified to prepare this action plan. Enabled by a receipt of a legacy in 2020, the RB has been able to appoint a member of staff to make sure the RB could keep all its own ways of working as environmentally responsible as possible, in line with all governmental, both Welsh and UK, environmental requirements, as well as to help each diocese work on the GB resolution passed in September 2017 to promote eco-church throughout the Church in Wales, and to help each Church in Wales diocese work towards securing eco-diocese registration. With this member of staff already in place, Julia is also in a position, should this motion pass, to put together an action plan to bring back to this governing body next year to enable us to reach net zero carbon emissions. Governing body, we are in a position to make a difference. I urge governing body to support this motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Bishop Joe. Some of us have been on the governing body long enough to remember previous discussions about this, and it is, as I've already indicated, a very, very pertinent and important contemporary matter, not just for discussion, but hopefully also for action. So Rebecca, the Reverend Rebecca Stevens, Becky, good morning. Becca, lovely to see you. I invite you to formally second, not formally, to second this motion. Apologies.
Thank you. Rebecca Stevens, elected Monmouth Diocese, Your Grace, members of governing body. It's a privilege to second this motion. As of February 2021, 496 climate emergency declarations have been made in the UK, which covers nearly 90% of the population. And most local authorities are aiming for their area to become net zero carbon. The ambition for the Welsh public sector is to be zero carbon by 2030. I do want to emphasise that the motion in front of you sets us on a journey, but the route and destination will be worked out in the action plan. The UN's International Panel on Climate Change warns that global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees between 2030 and 2052 if it continues to increase at the current rate. The IPCC used to say that we should limit the rise to 2 degrees, but they've now revised that to 1.5. But even that limit will have a dramatic effect on the world's climate. A single degree rise could eliminate fresh water for a third of the planet within 85 years. Mountainous regions will be at more risk of landslides, and low-lying countries such as the Maldives may be submerged by the seas. But what does it mean specifically for Wales? Well, the following impacts are expected between now and the middle part of this century: coastal flooding, increased storm intensity, and hotter extreme summer temperatures. Research by the Carnegie Trust and Joseph Rowntree Foundation in 2010 predicted that the impacts of climate change will not be equally felt across society. The poorest and already vulnerable will be the hardest hit because they have the less resource to adapt to the weather. Unfortunately, since that report was published, experience has proven this to be the case, with many households across the UK unable to pay the insurance premiums to cover flood risk. Colleagues in the social housing sector in Wales reported that many tenants who were flooded in the February 2020 floods did not have insurance for building contents. So the likely impacts on an individual basis are higher insurance costs, increased stress, repair costs to homes, churches and whole buildings. In addition, the state of nature in Wales in 2019 was that 1 in 6 species in Wales is at risk of extinction, with 73 having been lost already. 8% of Welsh species are at threat of extinction from Great Britain altogether. The number of butterflies have fallen by 52% since 1976, and more than 30% of Wales' terrestrial mammals are at risk of disappearing. On a local level, our ministry area is currently working hard towards our Silver Eco Church Award, and our local schools are all becoming eco schools. In a recent piece of work involving the young people of Newport, we discovered the urgency of climate change is recognised by the majority of them. 80% say that climate change requires a high or extremely high level of urgency. When asked what societal issues the church should be addressing, the participants gave a comprehensive range of answers, but it was clear that the current events in the world are a major concern for young people, with climate being mentioned numerous times across the age range, from 10 to 18. One teenager gave me permission to share her response, which was issues like climate change need to be addressed because many people suffer due to it, and the church could help raise the importance of dealing with it, so why aren't we? This is our chance to show our communities that this is an issue we will join with them to tackle, and our chance to work with and to give the younger generation a voice as we show them that we take their concerns seriously. It's a concern that affects us all. I wholeheartedly commend this motion to you.
Becca, thank you very much indeed. And again, thanks, Bishop Joe. This motion is now available to members of the governing body to ask questions on or to comment on. And forgive me if I may give myself the first bite of the cherry. We were engaged in a discussion quite recently here about the opening of church buildings. And I'm sure that there will be many members of the governing body who've been involved in discussions, particularly if they are from multi-church benefices or ministry areas or mission areas, where there might be an appetite developing from some quarters for all church buildings to be reopened as they were before the pandemic erupted. So therefore talking about zero carbon buildings, or at least the use of our buildings at the moment. There will be places where there are perhaps more than one church building in a group, and yet each one of them might be able to accommodate every single worshipper from each of those put together. But nevertheless, you may find yourselves with 4 buildings, all being heated by an oil boiler or a gas boiler on a Sunday morning or at some other time. Rationalizing the number of buildings that we use, not necessarily closing them, but making sure we make best use of them rather than pumping out harmful gases through our boilers, is one sensible thing which I would like to urge members to reflect on and very, very carefully indeed. And secondly, I listened to an interview on the radio the other day which the Duke of Edinburgh gave. Can't remember to which program it was, but he, as you know, had a very, very keen interest in matters of ecology. He's the president of the World Wildlife Fund, and he made a very interesting observation. He said, you might be able to demolish and rebuild a building, but you cannot reinvent a species. So there are really challenging, straightforward issues that we can address here. That's all I want to say. Opening it now to other comments from others. Simon, would you look after the queue, please?
Yes, thank you, Archbishop. The first hand that was raised is Jenny Wilson.
Jenny.
Hi. I basically just wanted to kind of put all my support behind this. I think this is great. If anything, it could have been done with being done earlier, but it's really good to see it. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, I look forward to not receiving the huge amount of paper that we currently receive for governing body, unnecessarily, particularly for those of us who are able to access the papers online. And secondly, I really hope that this is the kind of plan for this is really ambitious and includes some suggestions from people that have been going around for years and years and years that I'm aware of. For example, the use of solar panels on both churches and particularly on vicarages as well, as a contribution to this. So thinking a bit more outside the box and making things, doing things that perhaps will take a bit more effort, but will have a great effect on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jenny.
I'm now going to call on Henry Shepherd. After that, I shall call Nigel Doyle. And if I could remind members to give their name, their diocese, and their category of membership of the governing body, please.
Henry.
Hello, Henry Shepherd, Dr. Henry Shepherd, lay elected member from Llandaff. I too commend this motion. In the Diocese of Llandaff, we were recently very pleased to become a Eco-Church Bronze Diocese. And these things are very helpful as checklists, if you will, for knowing what can you do and have you done it in terms of your impact in this area. So I think that's the Eco-Church is an extremely useful tool. We don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, though, because the Bishop of St. David's is quite right when she says that human ingenuity is going to be needed here. There's some serious challenges ahead for us as individuals and as our and for our churches. I personally would like to point out ground source heat pumps as a particular technology which may be useful in certain areas. I think that when a church or a parsonage, for example, may be thinking about replacing the gas or oil boiler that the Archbishop referred to, they might want to think about that as a particular technology to use. I think that this motion is right because it's the right thing to do to be obedient to our Lord in stewardship of creation. It's the right thing to do to be loving to those liable to suffer due to climate change, which is of course all of us. And finally, it would frankly be a poor witness not to take such a measure at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Henry. I think next on the list, Simon, was Reverend Nigel Doyle.
That's correct, Archbishop.
Nigel.
Nigel Doyle, elected cleric, Swansea and Brecon. Really excited to see this on the agenda of the governing body. Sustainability and environmental focus has been part of my working life, when even 50 years ago, in the early days of the environmental agenda, it was seen as a non-issue. I remember sometime in the late 80s, there was a discussion at governing body about solar panels on church roofs, and it was some of the comments included from memory. It's not nice. We don't want solar panels on church roofs, and it's not part of the village community roofscape. Well, all villages and all communities now have lots of houses with solar panels on the roofscapes, and lots of community village buildings as well. And I would look perhaps for the early stages of this action plan to provide income generation, which can then cross-fertilize other actions. And maybe we're looking for guidance on cost-effective ground thermal systems and solar panels, both photovoltaic and thermal, and maybe even grants for churches from the RB to get something moving on this. Also, expedition of faculty applications, so we could have some detailed guidance on what would be acceptable, because quite often grant systems for solar panels are time limited. The work has got to be completed in a very short time frame. And if a faculty process has got to be going through and there's lots of queries, quite often there's the chance that you might miss out on the grant that's available and therefore not make the scheme viable. So highly commend this, but perhaps looking as priority income generating, which can cross-fertilize into other schemes. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Nigel, for that. Simon, are there other contributions?
There are. I'm next going to call Archdeacon Mike Comore, and after that I shall be calling the Reverend Jonathan Wright.
Thank you. Archdeacon Mike.
Thank you. I'm Mike Comore, elected cleric from Diocese of Llandaff. Like many, I think, of the governing body, I'm a committed environmentalist. And it seems to me that if we take that word emergency to mean what I think it means that we have to do everything we can, as soon as we can, to mitigate against increasing the emergency. And given that, I wonder, is there any justification at all in the governing body, our diocesan conferences, our annual vestry meetings, meeting in any other way other than online in the future? I fully accept that certain benefits of meeting in person are lost, but are they outweighed by the advantages of contributing to our reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Maybe I can assist Archdeacon Mike there. When we have talked about the meeting planning at the Appointments and Business Subcommittee, one of the things we clearly do take into account is whether or not they always have to be in-person meetings. And so your point, Mike, I can say, is already being looked at and taken very seriously. Jonathan Wright, please.
Your Grace, Governing Body, Dr. Jonathan Wright, Diocese of Swansea and Brecon, elected cleric. What is before us is an important commitment, but I wonder what is the financial resource that is behind it? If this statement of an emergency is to be made and it is to be meaningful, a significant budget needs to be proposed. Could we clarify what that is? And secondly, on page 3 of the Chase report, it says that discussions so far support the view that the Church should, as a whole, make a definite and binding commitment to reach a position where our activities do not add to global emissions. Could you clarify what binding means here? Will this mean, for example, the closure of buildings that can't be made net neutral, or is there going to be some way of having a carbon sharing scheme across the Church in Wales? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Simon, others?
The next speaker is Reverend Phil Bettinson, and after that I shall be calling Peter Lewis.
Thank you, Phil. Over to you.
The Reverend Phil, hang on, my mic isn't working. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Reverend Phil Bettinson, elected St. Asaph. One of the things that working in predominantly rural contexts, as we do in the Church of Wales, one of the biggest pollutants is the short but essential car trips, simply attending buildings on a Sunday morning. With our rurality, it can be difficult to look at getting an electric car because charging points, while they're becoming more available, are not as available as we would like them to be. And I know that in my local context, it is impossible to take a bus on a Sunday morning that would get me to all the churches on time. It would be useful if part of this report was to look at serious consideration about electric charging posts, both in church car parks, if we're lucky enough to have them, and at vicarages, to enable us to remove our carbon output on these short but essential journeys in order to help towards carbon net zero.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. Peter Lewis. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning. Peter Lewis, Llandaff, elected cleric. I really welcome this report, particularly because everything is so practical in the action points. But also I wonder if we follow some of the protocols that come from Eco Church, one of the primary things that churches can easily do in their congregations is their liturgical and their worship observance of looking after the environment. Our hymns, our liturgy, even our sermons are real great sources of trickling down these campaigns into the very fabric of the people who are there in worship. So I'm wondering if now that we've got a provincial officer, if part of their work may be to create some resources that can encourage us throughout the whole province in that liturgical sense, so that as well as these very practical ideas, there are things that can inform us continually. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It may well be that those who are members of the Liturgical Commission will take note of what you've said, Peter, but thank you for raising that with us. Simon, more to come?
Next speaker to call is Matt Davis, and that will be followed by calling Clive Hughes.
Thank you very much. Matt, over to you.
Matt Davis, Monmouth Diocese, elected clergy. I think this is an absolutely fantastic motion, something which has been mentioned before, has been needed and is in time and timely to do so. My comment would be similar to the question of finances and financial resources, is these things not to remain as just something that we put out and have no effect, but also needs to be on the minds of our committees and how we do things on a provincial and a diocesan and on a parish level. My question is, and my thought is, how can we make sure that in the groups where it matters, and even in the groups where it doesn't seem like it would have much effect, we can have on our minds this as an emergency and something we need to be dealing with. It's good to see in our investments policy as the next item that we have about trying to mitigate our investment in fossil fuels, but in other areas as well, and making sure that it is clear that this is something we do across the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Matt. I think, Simon, did you say Colin Hughes?
Clive Hughes.
Clive Hughes, I'm sorry, Clive. Over to you. Boridar, good morning. At the moment, you are muted, Clive.
Your pardon. Can you hear me now?
Got you. Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, Clive Hughes, elected member St Asaph. Been fortunate and recently been able to fit floor insulation in the church, internal wall structure insulation, draft proofing, and LED lighting throughout. There's a continuous serious difficulty in reducing power demand because of the loss of heat through and downdrafting from windows, which take up such large areas of external walls. A mitigation of heat loss equals a mitigation of power demand. The question is, can the governing body consider applying pressure on bodies such as CADU and others with a direct interest on our churches to consider a change in their attitude to the fitting of secondary glazing to the churches? I understand secondary glazing has been fitted to at least one local church without any negativity to date. So perhaps an application there where we can look to more modern facilities that will prevent any deterioration to windows would be a move forward in reducing demand.
Thank you very much indeed, Clive. You know, discussions across different bodies, particularly those who have external bodies who have interests in the way in which we care for and use our buildings, I think are absolutely essential. Simon, more to come.
Yes, the next speaker, Archbishop, is Paul Williams.
Paul, good morning.
Good morning. Paul Williams, elected Diocese of St Asaph. Just wondering, regarding the question of using electric vehicles, what can be done when the government is looking to cut subsidies on the cost of buying a new vehicle? And also the fact is that when using an electric vehicle, what considerations are taken into how that electricity is generated? What resources are being used?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. There's also been raised with some, of course, the question of the way in which the materials for batteries for either hybrid or electric cars are obtained. Anybody else in the queue, Simon?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, let me just give you a moment or two to reflect on whether anybody else wishes to make a contribution.
There is now, Archbishop. I call Henry Shepherd to speak.
Henry, welcome back.
Hello, yeah, Dr. Henry Shepherd, lay elected for Llandaff again. My apologies, I'd meant to highlight the importance of taking part in community-owned power generation schemes. So I think there's a real opportunity to take part in these schemes, whether it be community wind, community efforts in solar, but also potentially in the future. I mentioned ground source heating, but one of the developments which we are expecting to come to pass in the next few years is community ground source heating. So where there's an opportunity for that, I'd hope that Church of Wales premises would be first in the queue and advocating in favour of those. Essentially where you could heat every building in the street, for example, off the same loop, which is much more efficient than doing it individually. A number of people have raised the issue of electric vehicles and where the batteries come from. My understanding is that the battery technology is rapidly becoming both greener and also in terms of its manufacture, and also more ethical in the battery manufacturing companies are looking to to use raw materials which are less, which are more easily obtainable from places which are likely to use more ethical labour. So not so much cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. I just wanted to add those points.
Okay. No, thank you for doing that. I've been ticked off by the assessor, Henry, for allowing you to speak twice, which apparently needs special permission. But as this is my last governing body, I couldn't care less. I'm very happy to have allowed you to speak twice. Is there anybody else in the queue, Simon?
Yes, there is, Archbishop. The next
Are they speaking for the first time or the second time?
I've just checked, they're speaking for the first time.
In that case, I don't need to seek special permission from anybody.
Thank you. Right, so the next speaker is Paul Murray, to be followed by Liz Perkins.
Thank you very much indeed. Paul, welcome, good morning.
Good morning, Your Grace. Paul Murray, Swansea and Brecon elected. In support of Bishop Joe and listening to some of the speakers, I think we should get back to basics. And I think every church member, every congregation should now get together and ask themselves a very serious question: the viability of reopening their churches after this pandemic. There will be enormous expenditure on repairs and maintenance, which we've experienced in our own church, but the reheating of buildings. And I think now is the time to say, should we now close this church? Should we now move en bloc to another church within the ministry area or close to? Particularly some of these old Victorian churches, which are now in a dreadful state. And I think now is the time to seriously consider this question post-pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Liz, Croeso Cynnes, good to hear from you.
Diolch yn fawr I chi. Liz Perkins, Ysgol Bangor, Etholedig. I will be speaking in Welsh.
Diolch.
So maybe I should give everyone a second or two to
We will need a little while, Liz, to find the right buttons to press. Leon?
If you press interpretation, Archbishop, at the bottom of the screen, and then select the language of your choice.
Okay, Liz, I think you can begin.
Iawn, diolch yn fawr. Dwi isio deud bod fi yn falch iawn I gefnogi y cynnig gwych hwn. Dwi wedi gweithio ers blynyddoedd lawer I gymorth Cristnogol a dros fasnach 10, a dwi'n siŵr bod ni gyd yn cydnabod mai tlodion y byd sy'n dioddef fwyaf oherwydd newid hinsawdd. Mae wythnos cymorth Cristnogol yn dod cyn bo hir, ac mi fyddan nhw unwaith eto yn ymgyrchu ar y pwnc bwysig hwn, ar newid hinsawdd. Dwi isio hefyd gefnogi a chytuno efo'r archesgob, bydd yn falch I glywed hynny dwi'n siŵr, ynglŷn â ffordd da ni'n edrych ar yn eglwysu. Mae yna gyswllt da hefo'r sgwrs, efo'r drafodaeth sydd gyda ni cael yma ar ôl pandemig eglwys yng Nghymru, a lle da ni'n mynd efo hwnna, edrych o ddifri ar yr eglwysu, ar y cyfarfodydd, ar gresogi'r holl adeiladau enfawr yma. Ond dwi'm yn credu bod ti'n debygol iawn bod bobl yn mynd I bleidleisio yn erbyn hwn heddiw yma. Ond beth sy'n bwysicach na pleidleisio heddiw ydy bod ni yn dod yn weithredol, bod ni'n cymryd yr gosodiad hwn, y cais hwn o ddifri. Ac felly dwi'n wyndro os ydy Ebrill 2022 yn rhy bell I ffwrdd, mae hwnna'n flwyddyn o rŵan. Felly dwi'n wyndro os fedrwn ni roi pwysau ar y corff cynrychiolwyr I fynd ymlaen hefo'r gwaith hwn mor fuan os I bosib. Da ni'n sôn yma am argyfwng. A dwi'n mynd sowndio I mi fel argyfwng os da ni'n deud, o, nawn ni'n neud rhywbeth blwyddyn nesaf. Felly, ella fedrwn ni roi pwysau yn nhw I weithredu'n fuan, falle I ddod â rhywbeth erbyn cyfarfod mis Medi, neu os da ni'n dal I gyfarfod fel hyn ar Zoom, beth am gael cyfarfod brys, jyst I drafod ac I basio y cynigion ar y pwnc pwysig hwn. Diolch yn fawr I chi.
Dr. Liz, thank you very much. Simon, any more?
Yes, the next speaker is Richard Woods, to be followed by Tony Mullins.
Richard, good morning. Croeso, over to you.
Good afternoon. Richard Woods, elected.
We haven't had lunch yet, so it's still good morning in my book.
Taking my last opportunity to correct you. Good afternoon. I just want to speak firstly in support of this motion, but secondly in support of the response of so many people speaking in support of this. It is wonderful to hear the range of thinking, the range of thoughts about this, and an encouragement then to those at the RB who will be taking this up, assuming this is passed, to create that action plan, to take heart and be utterly bold in the scope of what we are seemingly suggesting that they might include in that action plan. To hear about the numbers of churches and the ways that churches are rewarded, etc., to be part of this is absolutely wonderful. So in support of the motion, but very much in support of all that we've heard as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. It will remain good morning until we break for lunch. I'm sorry if it upsets you. Tony Mullins. Tony.
Your Grace. Yes, good morning. I just like to say I welcome the appointment of a provincial energy officer, for what a better job title. This hopefully will give us a bank of knowledge that we can, as individual churches, sorry, I'm from Llandaff Diocese and I'm an elected member, that we as churches can actually tap into. Our particular church had a pressure air system which proved to be absolutely fatal for the fabric of the building. Then we decided to change and we went to under-pew heating, which was, after we sought advice from an architect, a church-approved architect, who said that the heating system would be affordable. Well, we've since found that the bills are astronomical, and we could only use it when we go back to churches for, say, a possible switch-on period of an hour before a service, which does nothing for the size of our church. It's a large town church, St Michael's and All Angels in Marseille. And the thing that I was concerned about is that we seek this advice, we are giving it, and sometimes it's not the advice that we really should be given. And to have this new provincial officer, hopefully things will be drawn into a tighter and a shared experience of heating systems which actually work and serve their purpose. I will be supporting the motion and welcome all that the Church in Wales can do effectively in the future.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure that there is a growing body of knowledge across the province about economical ways of heating, but there have been some disasters in the past, as you rightly point out, Tony. Simon.
The next speaker is Susan Fogarty, to be followed by Adrian Morgan.
Susan, welcome.
Bishop and everyone else. Yes, Susan Fogarty, elected lay member from Bangor Diocese. Reference was made earlier to the awards scheme. I was aware of this a few years ago. The person sort of within our ministry area who was taking the lead on that is no longer with us. And I wondered if it's possible to have a kind of a relaunch of that scheme. People have also made the point that, rather than waiting for this report in 2022, perhaps because that scheme is already in place, whether we can, kickstart it again to enable people within our church communities to start to engage in this already. Yes, I was going to make a mention of the fact that, yes, within our ministry area, we did make an attempt to work on having some low carbon, efficient infrared heaters put into the church, which, failed, unfortunately. Yeah, that would be my question with regards to this awards scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, very much indeed. Pachedig Adrian Morgan. Croeso.
Diolch Archesgob. Members of the governing body, Adrian Morgan, Diocese of Swansea and Brecon, co-opted. In the run-up to my ordination, it was shared with me that there was a long-standing stereotypical hymn about the church in Wales that began something along the lines of, "Like a mighty tortoise moves the church in Wales," referring to the fact that it is a mammoth institution that is very reluctant and very slow to change. But I think that the pandemic has actually proved that the church in Wales is very agile and very quick to change when people can see that change is necessary, and when change is well managed. And so I want to encourage the governing body not to underestimate the opportunity of a crisis, and to see this as a chance to really begin to think strategically about how we can change so that we're more able and fit for purpose to perform the mission of the church in today's world. And on that note, I want to welcome the motion, and particularly want to welcome the comments made by the Archbishop and others about best use of buildings. And to say that actually we all know that closing buildings or looking at different use for buildings can sometimes be a painful process, but when it is well managed and part of a bigger strategy, I think people can be quick to embrace it and ready to change. So this might be an opportunity for many reasons to think strategically about how we use our buildings, particularly because most of them have been closed for well over a year. And looking at environmental issues might be an opportunity to begin to explore that more strategically, I think, from the top down.
Diolch yn fawr, Adrian. Thank you very much indeed. Simon, now there are more.
There are two more speakers at the moment. The first is Naomi Starkey, and she will be followed by Daniel Starkey.
Diolch yn fawr. Naomi.
Hello. I would like to underline really what Liz Perkins was saying about the sense of urgency, and others have mentioned that too, but very much for people to go away from this governing body having supported this motion and say, what can we do right now? I spent the last 2 days involved in presentations about becoming an eco-diocese, becoming eco-churches to the 3 synods in Bangor Diocese. And sorry, I should have said Naomi Starkey, elected clergy member for Bangor Diocese. That is who I am. But basically, it was so inspiring to see people picking up on what they could do right now. They could look at how they're using their churchyards. They could look at where their energy supply was coming from for their church buildings. And I think it would be great if, in this motion being passed, the sense of urgency continues. And maybe in the September governing body, there's the opportunity for small group discussion and people to share what they've gone away and done in their diocese, in their parishes, as a result of this motion being passed, rather than waiting till April 2022.
Bishop Joe, just you could mention that the Church and Wales website will have new resources of things people can do straight away.
The next speaker, Archbishop, is Daniel Starkey.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning. Yes, I'm going to say good morning. I'm going to stick to it. Good morning, Daniel. Over to you.
Yes, good morning. Daniel Starkey, elected lay member, Bangor Diocese. And I just want to say that this is a really good motion that I wholeheartedly support. But I was just also wondering if we should consider taking action on other environmental issues, such as biodiversity and plastic waste in our churchyards, through making sure that we have enough wild spaces and wildlife habitats, and banning plastic flowers in our churchyards to make sure that these issues are also addressed.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel. Going back to Naomi's contribution, I can remember some years ago when I asked for a blank piece of paper to be put on everybody's table at a meeting in Lampeter so that they could write down what they had done in relation to a motion passed at the previous governing body. We didn't collect the bits of paper up or audit them in any way. But I thought, picking on your point, Naomi, it was a mechanism of challenging people. Have they actually done anything? Anyway, Simon, anybody else in the queue?
No, the queue is now empty, Archbishop.
Right, as we have given almost an hour now to this very, very useful and very interesting discussion, unless there's anybody who has a particularly urgent point they want to make or an urgent question to ask, I'll just pause for a moment. If not, I'm going to invite Bishop Joe and or Becca to respond as best they can to some of the points, if not all of the points that have been made. Bishop Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Your Grace. I'm not going to reply one by one to everybody. I'm just going to thank all the contributors, not only for the points they've made, but for the enthusiasm and the commitment that they've showed, and to assure them that this is only the beginning. The Church in Wales website is going to have resources from tomorrow. It's not about we've got this enthusiasm and this motion, which we hope you're going to pass, and then we're going to have to wait until next April for the plan. The website will have things that can be done from tomorrow. And as Liz Perkins suggested, we will have an update from September. And then, as various speakers have pointed out, there's things that the Church in Wales have been doing already with Eco Church. So we're encouraging people to do what they've already been doing, and the award schemes that people have been mentioning, and some very important points that I think we will be encouraging our climate change champion to be looking at, which is the impact on our heritage body, some of the things that are within our control that we're stymied in doing, to have conversations about our church buildings and how that's very difficult if our heritage bodies are stopping doing it. So looking at as the whole impact. Somebody else mentioned the importance of not just looking at the end product, but income generation schemes. So that's something that will be very important. So we have taken notice of everything that everybody has been saying, and I want to draw your attention to the fact that that Julia, who is the person now working at the RB, is there to be drawn on, and as you, Chase is there to be drawn on. We've got people in the Church in Wales who have been working on this both at a provincial level and at a local level. So please do, when you leave this debate, let's not stop it. As Mike Comer said, let's look at the way we work, not just at a provincial level, not just at a Darson level, but let's post-pandemic, let's learn what we've been doing over this pandemic. Let's take this as an opportunity to be committed about changing the way we work, to take seriously, and as people have written, it's not just a matter of global warming, but biodiversity and all the other ways in which we impact, our way of life impacts on the way we live. Let's take this seriously. We've had an opportunity, we've had a wake-up call, and let's not forget the other part of the motion that says let's work with others. We're not just the Church in Wales, we are Church in Wales members in Wales, in Britain, in our wider community, and we've written down all your points, so just because I'm not mentioning them, we will be looking at them, we will be taking them seriously. Julia will be working with them, and we will come back to governing body in September, we will come back next April, but we will be, from tomorrow, the Church in Wales website will be taking seriously everything that people have said, and there will be resources. And we already have liturgical resources in Times and Season, Creation Tide, and more stuff will be coming out to take what you've been saying into our prayer life, into our liturgical life as well, so that we can take seriously the fact that as Christians we see ourselves as stewards. And now perhaps more than ever we are realizing that we have to take the stewardship that we've always known from Scripture, we have to take that seriously in the way we live our lives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Bishop Joe, for your response, and my thanks once again for everyone who's contributed to this debate. I now, therefore, the motion has been proposed, it's been seconded, it's been discussed. I'm going to ask Matthew, please, if you would administer a vote.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. If I can have the motion on screen, please. There it is in English, and it will rotate in Welsh It's a longer motion, so I'm going to suggest a voting period of 90 seconds for this one, please, just to make sure everybody has ample opportunity to read the motion in full again. Could I have the poll on screen when you're ready, please? Thank you. 90 seconds. Thank you. We're halfway through the voting period, 45 more seconds. Fifteen more seconds for voting on this motion. Thank you. Please close that poll. And I can confirm that we have 111 votes in favour, 1 vote against, and 1 abstention. So that motion overwhelmingly passes. Thank you.
Okay. Splendid. Thank you. And once again, thank you to everybody who contributed to that discussion and vote. We are keeping very much in the same sort of territory, because we're now going to be looking at item 10 on your agenda, which is concerned with our ethical investment policy. And that, of course, has an impact in terms of some of the, companies in which we invest, because they themselves are capable of either preventing or causing damage to the climate. This motion set out on your order paper is going to be proposed by James Turner, the chair of the representative body, and it will be seconded by the Bishop of St. David's, again, Bishop Joe. So James, good morning, good to see you. Over to you.
Good morning, Archbishop and Archbishop, members of governing body, James Turner, ex officio member and chair of the representative body. The Church in Wales's ethical investment policy is kept under review by the Ethical Investment Group, which advises the RB trustees via its investment committee on the policy, the details of it and how it is implemented. And as many members will remember, the policy has been updated on a number of occasions in recent years, following advice from the Ethical Investment Group. The substance of this paper before you today was worked on by the Investment Committee and the Ethical Investment Group in 2019. And then at its meeting in March 2020, the RB trustees approved some alterations to the ethical investment policy. It was planned that this matter should have come before the governing body for its endorsement in April last year, but for obvious reasons, that was not possible. You will see that the RB is proposing 4 changes to be made to the policy. 2 of these are simple alterations to the text of the provisions concerning environmental, social and governance matters and the proliferation of armaments. The track changes on the 3rd page of the paper before you show how these amendments will fit within their respective clauses. The 2 other proposed alterations deal with divestment. It is proposed that we reduce from 20% to 10%, the percentage of turnover companies are permitted to derive from gambling, production or sale of alcoholic or tobacco products in order to allow the RB to invest in them. And to introduce a limit of 5% as the permitted percentage of companies' turnover to be derived from the production or extraction of fossil fuels. As you will see, this develops the previous provision which referred to thermal coal and producing oil from tar sands only. Now, this limitation will inevitably affect our investment income, and the investment committee has considered detail, advice, and examined research and data provided by the RBs to investment managers. So the RB is very aware of this, and it will be managed by the fund managers and monitored by the investment committee. It is important to recognise that the RB's investment portfolio is very well diversified, so any risk of lower returns in one sector or part of the global economy is therefore mitigated. Quite simply, we don't have all our eggs in one basket. Also, our investment managers are well versed in handling situations such as these, and indeed ethical investment strategies in the investment world are increasingly becoming sensitive to the holding of fossil fuel company shares. The financial implications aside, the RB was clear that intentionally limiting its investment in fossil fueled companies was something that it was not only right to do, but it wanted to do. Finally, the question of timing the divestment is something that has evolved since the RB's decision in March last year. A meeting that was promptly followed, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting downturn in the global economy. Selling stocks at that time would have resulted in very significant losses. The RB therefore subsequently made a decision not to divest by the end of 2020, but by the end of 2021. And it is proposed therefore that all the amendments set out within the paper be implemented by the end of 2021. So that brings me to the end of my remarks, and I would therefore like to formally propose the motion that the governing body firstly adopt the revised ethical investment policy approved by the representative body on the 5th of March 2020, and secondly endorse the recommendation from the representative body to action the proposed amendments by the end of 2021. So I would now like to hand over to Bishop Joanna as chair of the Ethical Investment Group to second the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, James, for that clear explanation. Bishop Joe.
Your Grace, members of the governing body, it's my pleasure to second this motion.
Splendid. Thank you very much indeed. Members of the governing body, this motion is now open for comment, discussion, questions over, if I may, to you. Simon, do we have a queue?
Your Grace. The first person to speak is Peter Ratcliffe, followed by Archdeacon Mike Comore.
Thank you. Peter, welcome. Croeso, over to you.
Thank you very much. Peter Ratcliffe, St David's elected cleric. I've got two concerns on this. One is that we still have 10% of turnover from gambling, alcohol or tobacco. I think it should be 0. And something that really, really concerns me is 5% of turnover from pornography, predatory lending, or the proliferation of armaments. That should be 0 from tomorrow, I think, if there's any turnover from pornography. I think we have to set a lead in that. And I think that's actually quite appalling that we still got that in. And that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. There will be a very clear response on that. There is an explanation that will come, obviously. Archdeacon Mike.
Thank you, Grace. My point is almost exactly the same, actually, with a possible exception of, I think there could be an argument for our nation needing to invest in people who produce armaments. That's a separate issue. I wonder whether if other people felt the same, whether pornography and predatory lending activities should be separated out from the clause related to the proliferation of armaments. But I would agree with the last speaker that zero should be the target for any investment in companies that benefit from pornography or predatory lending activities. Thank you.
As I say, I'm sure there is. I know as a past chair of the Ethic Investment Group myself that there is an explanation for this, but that will come. Are there more, Simon?
Yes, Archbishop Bob Evans is the next person to speak.
Bob, welcome back.
Thank you, Your Grace. Bob Evans, lay member, Monmouth. I sit as a trustee on various other investment bodies, and on most of those, we're finding from pressure that we are setting a target for zero investment in fossil fuels. Zero investment by 2025 or at least 2030 at the outside. And I just wonder if that might not be helpful to us, not just to set a threshold of 5%, but actually to set a target for going down to zero. Just very briefly, I mean, the problem in this area is that whilst there are investment products out there that do avoid complete investment in fossil fuels, they're fairly new and still untried in the market. So it's quite difficult to go to zero immediately, but I think it's helpful to try and set a target and a trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for making the distinction between targets and achievability, I think, is the issue. Simon, any more?
There are no more hands raised at the moment.
I'll give you a moment or two.
No further hands raised.
Dimaraj? No? Okay. I hand back, therefore, James, to you, if you would be kind enough, please, to deal with the observations that have been made.
Thank you, Archbishop. I think all three points make a fairly common point, and I think it is important to explain why those figures are actually in there rather than zero. Our intention would not be to, even where it says 10 or 5%, to therefore take that as an open door to invest at that level. The reason for putting it in there is frankly a very practical one, and that is to avoid what we would call indirectly waking up one morning and finding that we had somewhere around the world through one of our investments exposure to any of those types of companies or sectors. Let me try and illustrate that. If we had an investment in a supermarket chain, for example, and if that supermarket chain, as part of the products it sold, was to sell some tobacco goods, if it was actually zero, we would not be able to invest in that supermarket group at all. If, however, that supermarket group, although it was selling tobacco, but it was such a small percentage of its turnover, then we would find that would be an investment that could be permitted. Equally, there may be occasions when sometimes we invest into a fund which covers a number of different investments. It is not always possible to see through to the individual holdings in each of the companies which are held within that fund. So these are really ways of just saying that this is the policy we wish to adhere to, it is no way a way of saying, is this a way around it? But for practical day-to-day management purposes by our fund managers, there has to be something which actually allows sensible and worthwhile investments to go ahead, and not to suddenly find that totally unintentionally there's a very minor exposure.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, James. That is the explanation which I was alluding to in my remarks earlier on. None of us would want to consciously and deliberately invest in gambling, pornography, armaments, and so on. But it is impossible to get behind the screen, as it were, of every single pound that's invested anywhere. So I hope that the explanation that the chair of the RB has given gives some comfort to those who raise what were perfectly proper concerns. Thank you all very much indeed. We now turn to the vote. I ask Matthew, please, if you will make the necessary arrangements.
Thank you. The vote is going up on screen. It is a fairly short vote to read. It is in English and on the second slide in Welsh. I will ask that this be launched for 30 seconds, please, when you're ready. That poll is now live. Please vote. Ten seconds left. Okay, please, can we close that poll, please? Thank you very much. The results of that poll are 94 votes in favour, 6 votes against, and 8 abstentions. There is a hand in the chat. Is that an issue with voting in that particular instance, please? And if so, was there anybody else? Perhaps they could make that known in the chat.
The hand raises from Christopher Cottrell. If it's not an issue with voting, I wonder if the hand could be taken down, please. It's that the hand has gone, Archbishop.
Okay, very much indeed.
Marvelous. There's nothing else in the chat, so I'm happy to certify that. So that was 94 votes in favour, 87%, 6 votes against, and 8 abstentions.
Okay, thank you very much. It did occur to me that I might invite governing body to consider an emergency motion that business transacted before 1 p.m. always be introduced with good morning, and that lunch should be the threshold. But I'm inclined not to do that on advice that I've been given. I was also inclined to say that we might press on with something else until 1 o'clock, but others are clearly in a more generous mood than I am, and I've been told, let's give you all a longer lunch break because it's such a nice day. So that's what I will do. We will adjourn now, friends, until 2 o'clock, when I look forward virtually to seeing you again. Thank you all very much indeed.